The silence in the house never felt peaceful. It felt like something unfinished. Like a song that had stopped halfway through its melody and never found the courage to begin again. Every evening, just before sunset, the golden light streamed through the living room windows, painting warm streaks across polished hardwood floors. Dust drifted lazily through the air, floating in the quiet as though time itself had slowed down. Against the far wall stood an old mahogany piano. Its polished surface still reflected the fading sunlight, but the ivory keys had lost the shine they once carried. A thin layer of dust covered them, soft enough that a fingertip could leave a trail through the years. Ashley Carter sat on the piano bench. She wasn't playing. She never played anymore. Her hands rested quietly in her lap, but every few moments they would rise, almost without her realizing it, hovering just inches above the keyboard before retreating again. It was as though her fingers remembered a language her heart had forgotten how to speak. At her feet lay Barnaby, a 12-year-old golden retriever with kind brown eyes and fur the color of toasted wheat. He had grown old beside Ashley, witnessing every ordinary day and every silent heartbreak. Whenever she sat at the piano, Barnaby always came to lie beside her. Ashley reached down and scratched behind his ears. "You've waited longer than anyone," she whispered. Barnaby answered with nothing more than a slow wag of his tail before resting his head against her shoe. The house settled around them with tiny familiar sounds. It was a comfortable home. Not large. Not luxurious. Just enough. The walls were painted warm cream. Family photographs lined the hallway. A bookshelf overflowed with novels they always meant to finish reading. Anyone walking inside would probably call it peaceful. Only Ashley knew how much silence could weigh. 6 years. She hadn't touched the piano in 6 years. Not since the afternoon she had walked away from the conservatory. She wasn't leaving because she no longer loved music. She was leaving because she loved it too much to keep failing at it. Criticism had become louder than the melodies she once adored. Every missed note felt like proof that she wasn't enough. Little by little, the piano transformed from her greatest joy into the place where she felt smallest. Walking away had hurt. But staying had hurt even more. So she packed away her music. She found a stable office job. She convinced herself she had become practical. Responsible. An adult. People admired her decision. They called it mature. Nobody realized she had buried a piece of herself just to survive. The sound of a key turning in the front door interrupted her thoughts. Barnaby lifted his head immediately. A moment later, the familiar footsteps echoed through the hallway. Ashley smiled before she even looked. She knew those footsteps better than her own heartbeat. Mitchel Carter stepped inside carrying his lunch cooler in one hand and his work boots coated with the dust of another long day at the logistics warehouse. His shoulders sagged with exhaustion. A streak of grease marked one sleeve of his blue work shirt. The day had clearly been long. But the moment his eyes found Ashley sitting at the piano, everything else seemed to disappear. He didn't speak right away. He simply watched her. After nearly 11 years of marriage, he had learned that some moments shouldn't be interrupted too quickly. Finally, he crossed the room. His left heel dragged ever so slightly across the wooden floor. An old knee injury from his early warehouse days had never fully healed. Ashley could recognize that sound anywhere. Mitchel stopped beside her. "You've been here a while," he said gently. Ashley kept looking at the piano. "I lost track of time." "You usually do." A faint smile appeared on her lips. "You hungry?" "In a minute." He looked down at the untouched keys. "Thinking about playing?" "I don't know." You've been saying that for 6 years. Ashley lowered her eyes. I'm just looking at it. Mitchell shook his head softly. No. She finally turned toward him. No. You're not looking at the piano. He rested one weathered hand on her shoulder. You're grieving. His words settled over the room. Ashley looked away again. There was no point pretending with him. He always saw the things she tried hardest to hide. I miss who I used to be, she admitted quietly. Mitchell nodded. I know. I don't even know if I could still play. You could. What if I can't? He smiled. Then you'd learn again. Ashley laughed bitterly. It isn't that simple. No. He pulled up a nearby chair and sat beside her. It isn't. For several moments neither of them spoke. Mitchell leaned back and let out a slow breath. You know, he said, sometimes I dream I'm flying. Ashley looked at him. He rarely talked about those dreams anymore. In the dream, he continued, everything feels real. I can hear the engines. I can feel the controls in my hands. He smiled faintly. Then I wake up. Ashley reached over and intertwined her fingers with his. I'm sorry. He squeezed her hand. Don't be. You gave up your dream too. I postponed it. She looked at him. There's a difference. I keep telling myself there is. Ashley studied his face. The lines around his eyes had deepened. The boy who once stared endlessly at airplanes crossing the sky had become a man who scheduled truck deliveries, balanced invoices, and worked overtime whenever the company asked. He never complained. He simply kept showing up. For everyone else. Except himself. Neither of them realized it then. But that quiet evening, that ordinary conversation beside a dusty piano, would become the beginning of everything that changed. Sometimes life doesn't announce its turning points with thunder. Sometimes they begin with silence. With two people finally admitting the truth they had spent years trying to outrun. And somewhere deep inside that quiet house, two forgotten dreams were beginning to wake up. People often imagine that dreams disappear all at once. They don't. They fade slowly, like the colors in an old photograph left too long in the sun. One compromise becomes another. And before you realize it, you've become an expert at explaining why the life you wanted simply wasn't meant to be. The next morning arrived with soft rain tapping gently against the kitchen windows. Mitchell walked into the kitchen already dressed for work. He smiled as Ashley handed him a steaming mug. Thanks. You sleep okay? He shrugged. I've had worse. You were dreaming again. He looked down into his coffee. Did I talk? You said something about clouds. A quiet laugh escaped him. I guess my mind still hasn't accepted reality. Ashley reached across the table and squeezed his hand. You know. I used to dream about concerts. Mitchell looked up. I know. They've stopped. Maybe they're waiting. She smiled sadly. Waiting for what? For you. Ashley looked out the rain-speckled window without answering. It wasn't that she no longer loved music. She loved it enough to avoid it. Because loving something that reminded you of your greatest failure hurt more than never loving it at all. Years earlier, Ashley Carter had been one of the brightest students at the New England Conservatory. Professors praised the emotion in her performances. Friends whispered that she would one day perform on the world's greatest stages. At 19, she believed them. At 22, she wasn't so sure. Every recital became another impossible standard to reach. Every mistake echoed louder than every success. She remembered standing backstage after one international competition, clutching her sheet music while two judges quietly discussed another pianist. Technically brilliant, one had said. But Ashley plays too cautiously now. The other nodded. It's as though she's afraid to feel the music. Those words stayed with her. Fear slowly replaced passion. And fear is a terrible teacher. One rainy afternoon she packed her piano books into cardboard boxes, withdrew from the conservatory, and told everyone she wanted a more stable career. Only Ashley knew she wasn't choosing another dream. She was running away from the first one. Across town, years before they met, Mitchel was fighting a different battle. Growing up, he had never looked down when airplanes passed overhead. He looked up. Always. By 16 he was taking introductory flight lessons. By 21 he had earned excellent evaluations. One instructor even pulled him aside after landing. "You've got natural instincts. You can fly for the airlines someday." For a while. It looked as though he would. Then life interrupted. His father suffered a serious back injury. Medical bills piled higher every month. The family needed income immediately. Flight school suddenly became something they couldn't afford. Mitchell told himself it would only be temporary. He accepted a warehouse job. "I'll save enough money," he promised his mother. "I'll go back next year." Next year became the year after that. Promotions came. Responsibilities increased. Paychecks became harder to walk away from. Eventually, the warehouse wasn't just where he worked. It became who he was. The dream never officially ended. It simply stopped moving. When Ashley and Mitchell met years later, they became each other's safest place. They celebrated birthdays. Adopted Barnaby. Painted walls together. Laughed until midnight. Comfortably ordinary. Yet beneath every joyful memory lay one silent companion. What if? Neither spoke those words aloud. Some questions feel too dangerous to ask. Because once you admit what you've lost, you can never pretend it doesn't matter. One evening, after dinner, Ashley walked outside onto the porch with a cup of tea. High above them, an airplane crossed the horizon. Mitchell stepped onto the porch beside her. Both watched until the blinking lights disappeared into the distance. Ashley finally smiled. "You still watch every single one." Mitchell chuckled. "I guess I do. You ever wonder where they're going?" "Every time." She leaned her head against his shoulder. "I wonder who I'd be if I'd never stopped playing." Mitchell didn't answer immediately. Instead, he wrapped one arm around her and looked toward the darkening sky. "I don't think we're supposed to spend our lives wondering." Ashley looked at him. "What do you think we're supposed to do?" He smiled softly. "I don't know yet. But I have a feeling we're about to find out." Neither of them realized that less than 24 hours later, a single cream-colored envelope would arrive in their mailbox. An invitation. One that would force them to confront the lives they had left behind. And ask themselves a question that had been waiting for years. Was it truly too late? Or had they simply convinced themselves it was? Wednesday morning began like every other weekday. As she pulled into the driveway that evening, she noticed something sticking out of the mailbox. A thick envelope. Cream-colored. Embossed in gold across the front were 4 words she hadn't seen in 6 years. New England Conservatory of Music. Her heart skipped. She stared at the envelope as though it might vanish if she blinked. Her fingers trembled. No. The word escaped as little more than a whisper. She carried the envelope into the house. It sat on the kitchen counter for nearly an hour. Untouched. Like a door she wasn't sure she wanted to walk through. When Mitchell finally arrived home, he immediately sensed something was different. He picked up the envelope. He looked back at Ashley. "You've opened it?" She slowly shook her head. I can't. Mitchell sat beside her. You want me to? Ashley hesitated. Then nodded. He slid one finger beneath the seal and unfolded the thick stationery inside. It's from the conservatory. They're holding a memorial concert. Ashley closed her eyes. In honor of Professor Eleanor Hastings, whose extraordinary dedication shaped generations of musicians, we invite former students to join us for an evening celebrating her life and legacy. Ashley felt her throat tighten. Professor Hastings. The woman who had told her, don't just play the notes, Ashley. Tell the audience who you are. Mitchell reached the final paragraph. They're inviting former students to perform. I can't, Ashley whispered. I'll make a fool of myself. You don't know that. I do. Mitchell folded the letter and placed it gently on the table. I don't think you're afraid of failing. I think you're afraid of discovering you still love it. The words landed like stones dropped into still water. Ashley wanted to argue. Instead, tears filled her eyes. Because he was right. She had spent years convincing herself music belonged in her past. Mitchell stood and disappeared into the hallway. A few moments later, he returned carrying something old. Something covered in dust. A worn leather flight logbook. Ashley looked up in surprise. I haven't seen that in years. I know. Mitchell slowly opened it. The funny thing is, it still hurts. Ashley looked at the piano in the next room. Mitchell looked at his logbook. 2 dreams. 2 unfinished stories. 2 people who had quietly accepted lives that were safe. But never quite complete. Finally, Mitchell broke the silence. If we keep living for the safety of tomorrow, we're going to wake up one day and realize we never actually lived today. Neither spoke another word. They didn't need to. Because something had shifted. Not outside. Inside. That night, long after Mitchell had fallen asleep, Ashley quietly walked into the living room. The mahogany piano stood exactly where it always had. Waiting. She sat down on the bench. Her fingers hovered above the keys. Her heart pounded. Then, very gently, she pressed a single note. Its sound echoed through the quiet house. Soft. Uncertain. Beautiful. For the first time in 6 years. The silence had finally answered back. The hardest part of starting over isn't taking the first step. It's believing that the first step is enough. Ashley barely slept that night. Long after the single note had faded into silence, she lay awake replaying its sound over and over. It hadn't been perfect. But for the first time in 6 years, she hadn't walked away. The next morning, the alarm rang at 6:30. Ashley walked straight to the piano. She sat down. The bench felt familiar beneath her, as if it had been waiting for her return. She rested her hands above the keys. What if yesterday was a mistake, she whispered to herself. She closed her eyes. Taking a slow breath, she pressed another key. Then another. The melody stumbled. She stopped. Frustrated, she buried her face in her hands. I can't do this. Behind her came a familiar voice. Sure you can. I woke up when I heard the music. I wasn't making music. I was making mistakes. I heard someone trying. He walked over and kissed the top of her head. Nobody climbs a mountain in one step. That evening, after work, Ashley practiced again. Only 15 minutes. The next day. 20. By the weekend. Nearly an hour. Some days she improved. Other days she sounded like a beginner. But something remarkable happened. She stopped measuring success by perfection. Instead, she measured it by showing up. Across town, Mitchell was fighting his own battle. Every afternoon during his lunch break, he found himself parked near the small regional airport on the edge of town. One afternoon, a young flight instructor noticed the familiar pickup truck. She walked over with a friendly smile. "You like airplanes?" Mitchell chuckled. "I've always liked airplanes." "You fly?" "I used to." "What happened?" He looked toward the runway. "Life." She handed him a small brochure. "Community College Aviation Program. We've got people in their 20s. And people in their 60s. He laughed. "I think I'm somewhere in the middle." "Then you're exactly the age we're looking for." Mitchell stared at the brochure for several long moments. Then folded it carefully and slipped it into his shirt pocket. That night, he placed it beside Ashley's invitation. Dreams they thought had expired were quietly asking for another chance. Sunday afternoon arrived with bright blue skies. Ashley sat at the piano practicing scales. Mitchell entered carrying a small cardboard box. "I found these." Ashley looked inside. Stacks of old sheet music. Concert programs. Handwritten notes from Professor Hastings. One page slipped onto the floor. Professor Hastings' handwriting filled the margin beside one difficult passage. "Don't chase perfection. Chase honesty. Audiences forgive mistakes. They never forget sincerity." Ashley stared at the words. "I'd forgotten she wrote this." Mitchell gently placed the page in her hands. "I don't think she wanted you to." Ashley smiled through her tears. "She always believed in me." "So why don't you?" Ashley couldn't answer. Because the truth was painful. She had trusted strangers' opinions more than the voice that had first taught her to love music. Not anymore. She walked back to the piano. Placed the sheet music in front of her. Took a deep breath. And began again. The melody flowed awkwardly at first. Then steadier. Then smoother. She wasn't playing to impress anyone. She was playing because it reminded her who she really was. Mitchell watched quietly from across the room. His heart swelled with pride. Not because she was becoming the pianist she once had been. Because she was becoming Ashley again. Later that evening, after dinner, Ashley noticed Mitchell sitting at the kitchen table with the aviation brochure. "You've looked at that thing 100 times." He smiled sheepishly. "I know. So what's stopping you?" He hesitated. "The same thing that stopped you." "Fear." "Fear." Ashley looked at the piano, then back at Mitchell. She realized that everything they had built together was just a foundation. They hadn't built it to hide in. They had built it to be brave in. "What if we both do it?" she asked. Mitchell looked up. "Do what?" "Chase the things we left behind. You take the class. I'll perform at the memorial." He stared at her. "Are you serious?" "I've never been more serious." He reached out and took her hand. "What if it's too hard?" "It's already been hard," Ashley replied. "The last 6 years have been the hardest of my life because I was living in a cage I built myself. I'd rather struggle while chasing my dreams than suffer while hiding from them." Mitchell squeezed her hand. For the first time in years, he didn't look at his watch to check the time. He thought about the sky. "You're really going to do it?" "I'm really going to do it." He smiled. It was the smile of the boy who looked at the clouds, not the man who looked at the logistics reports. "Then I'm in." The house no longer felt quiet. It felt expectant. They sat at the table for a long time, planning not for a safe retirement, but for a life they were finally going to start. It was chaotic. It was loud. It was exactly how life was supposed to be. As the sun went down, Ashley stood up and walked to the piano. She didn't look for dust. She didn't worry about the neighbors hearing her mistakes. She sat down and played. Music wasn't about the notes. It was about the heart that pushed them into the air. Mitchell stood in the doorway, watching her. He realized that the warehouse wasn't his destination. He had been waiting for the right moment for 15 years, only to realize that the right moment wasn't something you waited for. It was something you created. They spent the next month in a whirlwind of change. Ashley woke up at 5 to practice. She felt the stiffness in her fingers turn into strength. Mitchell signed up for his first class. He spent his nights reading technical manuals that felt like poetry. One evening, as they were sitting on the porch, Mitchell turned to Ashley. "You're different." She smiled. "I know. I like it." "I like you, too," she said, leaning against his shoulder. "You seem lighter." "I am. I don't think I'm looking for an excuse to stay on the ground anymore." "Neither am I." They understood now that the second act of their life wasn't about fixing the past. It was about writing a new future. The night of the memorial concert arrived. The conservatory was bustling. Ashley stood backstage, her heart hammering against her ribs. She was wearing the same dress she had worn in the photograph. It was a little tighter, a little older, but it felt right. She looked at her hands. They were trembling. That was okay. She didn't need them to be perfectly still. She just needed them to be ready. Mitchell sat in the third row. He was watching his wife step back into the light. The announcer called her name. Ashley walked out onto the stage. The lights were blinding. But this time, she didn't shrink away. She took a deep breath. She remembered the note Professor Hastings had written. "Don't chase perfection. Chase honesty." She began to play. The music didn't come out as a perfectly rehearsed recording. It came out as a story. She played the music of someone who had been lost, and someone who had found their way home. When the final note faded into the silence of the hall, no one moved. Then, the applause began. It was the roar of people who had been touched by something real. Ashley stood up. Her knees were shaking, but she was smiling. She looked at the third row. Mitchell stood up, his face radiant. In that moment, she knew it wasn't about the applause. It was about the fact that she had finished the song. They left the concert hall together, walking out into the cool night air. The city was glowing, alive with possibilities. "You were incredible," Mitchell said, taking her hand. "I was me," she replied, and it was the best compliment she could think of. They drove home in silence. It was the silence of peace, the kind that follows a storm when the air is clean and the world feels new. They realized that the second act was only just beginning. They had years ahead of them. More lessons. More performances. More flights. More dreams. They had finally learned that the biggest risk wasn't failing, it was refusing to try. They stood in the center of their living room, two people who had finally stopped apologizing for who they were and started fighting for who they were meant to be. The house was full of light. The future was full of space. And for the first time in their lives, they weren't waiting for anything. They were already there. But there's one question that still lingered in their minds, even as they moved forward. A question they realized was never really about the music or the airplanes, but about the very nature of our existence. They looked at each other, and the question hung in the air, waiting to be answered by the life they were now building together. It wasn't about whether they could succeed. It was about whether they would be brave enough to keep going, even when the path became difficult again. And as they turned toward each other, ready to face whatever came next, they knew the answer. They would keep going. Because they finally understood that the story wasn't about the finish line. It was about the journey. They were ready for whatever the next page held. Because they had finally learned how to write it. Life is not a series of checkpoints where we either succeed or fail. It is a long, winding road where the only thing that truly matters is whether we are willing to keep walking. Because we all have a dream, don't we? A melody we've left unplayed. A sky we've stopped looking toward. A story we've been too afraid to tell. The question isn't whether it's too late. The question is whether we're ready to start. Are you? If you had to start your second act today, what is the one thing you would change? What is the one step you would take that you've been putting off for years? We hope this story reminds you that you are never too old, and it is never too late. The silence is waiting. The keys are waiting. The sky is waiting. It is time to begin. It is your life, after all. And it is still your story to tell. So, what will your second act look like? The answer is yours to write. And the world is waiting to hear it. Take a deep breath. Open your eyes. And start. The rest of your life is waiting for you. Don't keep it waiting any longer. Because the greatest tragedy isn't failing to reach the stars. It's never looking up to see them. And your stars are still there, shining in the dark. Waiting for you to reach for them once again. So, go ahead. Reach. Believe. And start. Your journey is just beginning. And we can't wait to see where it takes you. Because you are more capable than you know. And you are more ready than you think. Today is the day. This is your moment. And you are finally, truly, starting. Believe in yourself. Because we believe in you. And now, it's time for you to start writing your own story, one day at a time, one step at a time, until the day you realize that the dream you once left behind was only the beginning of something much, much bigger. The second act is yours. Take it. It belongs to you. Every single moment of it. Every single choice. Every single dream. And now, as you look toward your future, remember this, the best is yet to come. It really is. So be brave. Be bold. And be you. Because that is exactly what the world needs. It needs your song. It needs your flight. It needs your voice. So let it out. Don't hold back. This is your time. And your time is now. Believe in your capacity to change. Because you can change. You can grow. You can reach for the things you thought you had lost, and in doing so, find yourself once again. You are capable of greatness. You are capable of courage. And you are capable of being the person you were always meant to be. So what are you waiting for? Start today. Start now. And never look back, except to see how far you've come. Your second act is waiting. And it is going to be the best part of your story. We know it. And now, it is time for you to know it too. Believe in your potential. Believe in your power. And believe in the beauty of your own second act. Because it is waiting for you to begin. And it is going to be magnificent. So take that step. Take that breath. And let the music begin. Because you, my friend, have a story to tell. And the world is ready to listen. Are you ready to tell it? We certainly hope so. Because this is it. This is your moment. And it is absolutely, 100%, yours to claim. So go for it. With all your heart. With all your strength. And with all the courage you have inside. Because you deserve it. And you are worth it. So, let's start. Together. One day, one step, one dream at a time. Until the very end, and beyond. Because your story is just beginning. And it is going to be something wonderful. We can't wait to see it. And we know, deep down, you can't wait either. So start today. Because today is the only day you have. And that is more than enough. It really is. Believe in it. And trust in it. And above all, believe in yourself. Because you are the author, the main character, and the hero of your own life. And you have the power to write whatever ending you choose. So, make it a good one. Make it a memorable one. Make it a second act that you are truly proud of. Because you can. We believe in you. And we know you are ready. So let's go. It's time to start. Your second act is waiting. And it is yours. Forever. And ever. Start. Today. Now. Let's go.